welcome to everyone, and it's a pleasure to be able to speak to you and to look into the Word of God to bring us to better understanding. Now, my background is one of engineering, problem solving. This is where I came from, spent a lot of time there. God had put me through a series of situations that the way I look at it now is he was training me or opening up my mind to greater and more important understandings than what one has when he is working in this everyday world. So that's basically my background. And tonight I'm going to be speaking to you about the first 3 chapters of Genesis. And you kind of wonder, we've all read this over and over, but there's always something to be learned. Regardless, you may think you've read these scriptures over and thought about them, but it seems, at least for me, when I reinvestigate what the Bible has to say, it always seems that more information is given. And this is the result of our Father blessing us. And so tonight we're going to be dealing with the book of Genesis. And as it worked out in the past, I made a presentation to a group of people that titled their organization Genesis. And so it kind of fit. I spoke to them basically about the Noachian flood. And after they questioned me and they said, well, do you have a biblical worldview? At that time, it's like, I don't know what that is. I said, I believe in the Bible. And well, do you believe that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days or 7, through a period of 7 days total, you say, but 6 days of actual creation? And I said, well, not exactly. And so the Christian churches of today have this term, biblical worldview, and it entails the fact that they think that the earth wasn't created until you get into the book of Genesis, and in chapter 1 is when the world was created. Now, of course, I pointed out certain things to them at that time. And so they, as a result of me pointing at what we're going to, in a sense, look at here, they said, well, you're opening up the Bible to the evolutionary theory when you say that. In other words, you're saying that the earth was created before. And this is really quite clear. You go to Job chapter 38, verse 4 through 7, and we read where it says, where were you? In other words, God is talking to Job, and he's kind of, making, if I was in Job's shoes there, I would feel pretty little. He says, where were you when the foundations of, when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were the foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy, when And so it's pretty obvious that the earth was a beautiful creation. Universe was a beautiful creation. It impressed the angelic host. And so, and we, when the astronauts went to the moon, they looked back down on the earth and they said, wow, that's beautiful. And it is. They sent back pictures. You can see the earth is beautiful. And so when you look at it, what they're saying is that where the Bible says is, and if we read it right in the first verses, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form. And so it also should be clear to us that God does not make things unless when he creates things complete. They're not in a process. We don't have a situation where we're seeing a process of something being created by God in the physical sense. And so as we look at this, and we should recognize that at the time, and they have to admit this, at the time, you only have the angelic host and Jesus Christ and God the Father. These are the principles that were there to see the creation. That's all. And so therefore, we should keep that in mind when we're looking at this, at these first verses. And so as we look at this, we have to realize that if God creates things perfectly to start with, then we wouldn't find the earth in this condition. And so the reason, of course, is something had to take place to cause the earth to be in the condition that is described in Genesis 1 and 2. So when we realize that, so there's a time element here that we're looking at. It may not be obvious, but it is a time element, because from the time that it was created until the time that we're looking at it here in the book of Genesis, something happened. It no longer was a thing of beauty, and it had to be redone. And so this is what I told those people. I said, well, God was recreating the earth. It wasn't made. And of course, that was because of the theory of evolution. Oh, you don't want to say that because you're opening up the Bible to the evolutionists. Well, this is what the Bible says. So, we have to go by what the Bible is telling us. And so if we wanted to look at the translations of the word in there, it's the word was and is 1961 and has the following definitions in the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament: to be, to become, to exist, to happen. And so rather than using the word was, it would be more appropriate to use the word became. So the earth became without form, void. And so this is, we understand this. Now, at the time when I was dealing with these people, this was what I didn't want to go into the detail of why the earth was changed, but we understand by what it says in Isaiah chapter 14 that Satan, of course, one of the archangels at that time, thought he was going to take charge, and so he rose up to fight against the Creator God. So we understand this, or we should understand this. And we're going to see as we go through the study, we're going to be looking at this individual a little bit more closely to see how he is going to affect the whole creation. And fact is, we are suffering under the result of what he was able to accomplish. So if we're looking at the earth in this condition, it would not be recognizable relative to Job 38. But so then that's the reason why we look at it this way. Now, there is something that we need to recognize about the Bible. The Bible is a time generated book. In other words, God puts the time elements in the Bible from cover to cover, from the very beginning, when he's telling us that he spends 6 days recreating the earth. And then you can go to the New Testament and you can look in John 2, and it gives us a time element for the rebuilding of the temple by Herod. So we almost, you could say, and then if we, as we've been doing, going through the book of Revelation, you'll see all kinds of time elements in the book of Revelation. So we have to understand the importance of time in relative to our understanding of the Bible. And so this is an important consideration, really. And so I'd like you to think about time. I'm going to have you think about time a little bit differently than the way that you normally think about time. So when we look at what did God do? Well, he on the very first day, day one, and that's the day, of course, that we call Sunday. And so in a way, it's kind of appropriate because God cleared the atmosphere so that the sun could shine directly on the moon, on the earth. And that is the first, that's one thing he did. And the second thing he did is he started the earth to rotate. He started it rotating. And so this is why I would like you to think about in time as the rotation of the earth. This is what we're really counting when we talk about time. We're talking about counting the number of rotations that the earth is going to make as it circles the sun. This is the time element. And this is an important thing for us to recognize. Now, there's another interesting thing. Clearly, the description that we're talking about here in Genesis 1 takes place on the earth at the Garden of Eden. And so if we think about this, and when it clearly tells us that he's counting the evening and the morning. So when does the day start? At the Garden of Eden, the first day started at even. And so when we think about this now, I want you to think about, what about the other half of the earth? On the other half of the earth, instead of it being at sunset time, it's 6 a.m. in the morning, 12 hours different, basically. And so you might say, well, they kind of lost part of the day. But the reality is, when you're thinking in rotation, one rotation of the earth. When now one rotation of the earth is completed, when we're approaching day 2 of the creation, now we find that the people have, as we're approaching day 2, they're already in day 2 by about a half a day in time element as we look count time. And so, and when we think about this now, doesn't this make sense the way that time is looked at, how we deal with time? We have brethren in Australia, and they finish the day, the Sabbath day, basically a half a day ahead of us. And so, and this is the reason. It's really pretty logical if you think about it in those terms. And so this is what we need to recognize. And so this is our worldview, biblical worldview. Our biblical worldview is one where we take the Bible and we believe it in total. And it has a time element in an important time element. If you think about this, now there are some that out there that believe that God made a change in the length of the year and the length of the month. And if you think about that, you think about the that isn't quite right, is it? There is no record of this. I mean, people want to go to a 360-day year, and they want to take 30-day months. Now that it's really nice, makes it really easy if you want to go that way. But there isn't a single statement in the Bible that indicates that God made such a change. He didn't make it. And so we have it in order for prophecy and every statement in the Bible to be accurate, time cannot change. Because if you do that, you distort the time elements in the Bible. And so therefore, this is something that you wouldn't do. Now, as we looked at that, we said, well, the first day, what did he do? He cleared the atmosphere and he started the earth to rotate. As far as man is concerned, this is his accounting of time. Prior to that, the evolutionists like to say, well, that was 5 million years ago. Well, no, wait a minute. Until you have this point in time where God is putting the starting the earth to rotate and starting it on its way, you can't have time in years. It didn't exist. You couldn't account for it in that way. And so we're looking at the first. The next is the separation of the water, the mass of the earth, right? And that we have in Genesis 1:9-10. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and the dry land may appear. And it was so. So God called the dry land earth and gathered together the waters. He called, and God saw that it was good. The work on the third day still wasn't finished. And then God said, let the earth bring forth grass, herbs that yield seed, and the fruit trees that yield fruit according to the kind whose seed is in itself on the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass and herbs that yield seed according to its kind, and a tree that yields fruit with seeds in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the third day. So we see here, this is, if we think about how logical this is. When you are, we realize, of course, because we've read it, but he's not going to have, the animals aren't going to be created. He's creating the fauna first, because why? Because animals feed on it. And if he created the animals and put them on the earth and they didn't have anything to eat, wouldn't be the smartest thing in the world. So, of course, he does this. And then we go into in Genesis verses 14 through 18. And this is really an important set of verses, because this is where the born-again Christians, etc., don't like to point as well. It reads right here, it reads that he created them. Well, yes, it reads that he created them, but it doesn't tell you when he created them. You have to go to Job to find out when he created them. And so he didn't create them at this time. So what is really the importance of this set of verses here? And this is something maybe you may not have thought about, but if we read this, God set them, Genesis 1:17 and 18. It says, God set them in the firmament of heaven to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day, and to rule and the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. If we continue to read, we also find out that he, in the process, he set these things there. The earth, the rotation of the earth and the sun for the day, right? And the year, and also the moon for appointments. And this is kind of an important understanding. What we have to recognize is, because we recognize that these things were already in existence, and so therefore what he really did was set his clock. He set his clock at this time. And so in order to, so that the clock would reflect the first days of creation. And this is an important consideration, because if he doesn't do that, the clock is not correct. So he has to make an adjustment in the movement of the universe and the earth and the moon, etc., so that it fits the time element that he has set in place. So when we read that, we should be reading with the understanding that these verses are talking about God setting his clock. And so it's important for us to have that understanding about these verses. I can read that Genesis 1:14 through 15, and he explains the purpose. God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of heaven to give light on the earth. And it was so. And so you see, this is, if we think about this, this is the time element that he's setting the clock. And that clock is running. It's never stopped, basically. You say, well, what about Joshua's long day? And what about Hezekiah's reversing the sundial. Well, basically, the count of the days never changed. Now, when we look at it, we look at it in terms of hours. Joshua's long day was more than 24 hours, but it stopped. If you read the account, the moon, it says the moon stood still and the sun stood still. The day number did not change. So if that took place on a Thursday, it was still Thursday. It was just an hour's a long Thursday. So this is something that we should recognize. And then here is something that is so understood that we neglect to recognize the importance of a particular understanding, and we just take these things for granted. And when he created man with certain abilities, right? In other words, he created man with 5 senses. This is why he created. What we can see, what we can hear, what we can feel, what we can taste, what we can smell. 5 senses. That's it. We can't. When you start thinking about this, everything that we have learned fits into these 5 senses. We cannot go beyond those 5 senses. This is an impossibility. We learned a lot, so much, everything. We look at all the different things. We have books, we have computers, we have automobiles and airplanes. And if you really take this back, the only reason that we have these things is because of the 5 senses. We cannot go beyond those 5 senses. And in a way, this is a limiting factor. We are limited. And it's important for us to recognize this. And when you start thinking about, the import of this, recognizing this, you would understand that when you confront evolutionists, let's say, and you say, well, if you're starting with nothing, how can you make anything? And you see, this is something they cannot conceive of. Because in their life, they always, and as far as that's concerned, every one of us, we either see, smell, etc. Using one of the 5 senses. This is what we are limited to. We cannot go beyond that. We don't have the capacity to go beyond that, and it has never been gone beyond. And so when these concepts, if you confront someone with that concept, you see, of course, they can't. There's nothing they can say. They can't even conceive of nothing because it's never happened. This is really important for us to be able to recognize that what man's capacity is. In fact, if we go to Hebrews chapter 11, and we read in Hebrews chapter 11, right in the first verses, it says, now faith is, I need my magnifying glass. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Oh, what is he mentioning here? One of the five senses. See, he's mentioning it. And well, let's continue to read. For by the elders obtained a good testimony. By faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen are not made of things which are visible. And you see, this is the key to understanding, a really important key to understanding how the creation occurred, because you see, we haven't the capacity to understand what it was that God used to make the universe. We can't comprehend that, because God hasn't given us the ability to comprehend that. We can only comprehend those five senses. This is it's so important for us to recognize this, because it affects everything that we learn. And so the next important statement that we're going to come into is well, I'll make a statement here for you. The evolutionists find life temporary. We live, we die, and that's the end of it. And that's a pretty sad ending. I mean, well, you can, if you have this kind of belief, you can understand why the world functions the way it does. And this life is also temporary for those who understand that God has a plan for mankind, and they understand it's temporary for a reason. And so this is also important for us to in understanding the book of Genesis and these first chapters. And I find it extremely interesting when we're looking at the Genesis 1:20 through 23. No, wait a minute. We want to go in verse 26 and 27 is where we really want to go there. And in that verse, God says, let us make man. The words "let us" reveals an important truth, that there are more than one being involved in the process of creating man. As God is the only one who can create life, it is seen what the rest of the Bible reveals. Two beings are God, the Father, and Christ, his Son. One does the planning, and the other carries it out. And so this is the basis of what we understand. And so when we actually read this in Genesis, where God says, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. And people generally pass over. I mean, it's passed over. But when you look at those two words, they have specific meanings. God didn't stutter. People they think, well, he kind of stuttered likeness and image, and kind of that's all the same thing, isn't it? No, it isn't. There's an important distinction. One is And in this particular case, we can look at likeness is image is 7554 in Strong's number, and likeness is 1823. They're two separate words. One is shape and form, make man. So if we want to know what God looks like, we have to look at the mirror. And, he has hands and he has a head and he has torso and legs. And this is what God said he's going to do. He's going to make us shaped like him. And what's the other thing that he's going to be doing? He's going to be creating in us his character. This is, see, right here in the very first chapter, God is telling us what the whole rest of the Bible is about. That's pretty astonishing when you think about it. It's pretty well passed over, though, by most. And so, as we go through this, I can give you the word likeness means God created man with the same outward shape as himself, head, arms, etc. Image, which means godly character. To have the character of God means that whatever circumstance, and this is the important thing for us to recognize and understand, whatever circumstance in that we are faced in life, in this life, and this is the purpose of this temporary life that we're living. So whatever the circumstances, he wants us to think like he thinks. This is an important, extremely important concept, and it's right in the first chapter. Now, when we are looking at this world and the way it operates, there is basically just two systems. That's all there are. There's of operation, basic operation, and the two systems. One is survival of the fittest. And this is, we've spent 6,000 years basically functioning under the system of survival of the fittest. You might say, well, what do you, is this really, I mean, you're putting everything into a box here, and I'm not sure that this is the box that that 6,000 years have been fit into, but it is. Because what it means that everyone, and you can see this if we go back to Cain and Abel. What was Cain's motivation for killing Abel? Well, he was eliminating the competition for God's attention. Yeah, this is what he thought. I'm going to be number one, and I'll just remove number one, and so I'll move up. I'll now be number one. And this is basically, everybody is out there is to protect themselves. And so what have they done in this process of protecting themselves? They've joined together in nations. And the nations do what? Their whole emphasis is to protect their position. And how do they do that? Well, we spend astonishing amounts of money on armaments. That's what we do. We spend astonishing amounts because we are stuck with this system. Well, how did we end up with this system? This is the question. This is the question that we're going to look at and to answer. That and there is a kind of an interesting comparison here. And this is where we come with this understanding that we had that God is creating this righteous character in us. And we look at knowing that God has made man, it is clear that he has the right to destroy it. This is an important principle. And it should be clear to us. Anything that I make, I can destroy. And this is true about any person, or anything that's made, it can be destroyed. And so therefore, God made us. If God made us, he has every right to destroy us. Every right. We're out here, and we're only here by his good will. That's all. We're not here because there's anything basically good in us, or there's something, well, you're here for a really good reason. No. We're just here because God made us. That's all. And if he wants to destroy us, he has every right to destroy us. Or on the other hand, if he wants to elevate us, he can elevate us. But it's his decision, not ours. It's not our decision. So we need to recognize that that needs to be part of our understanding. And if we have to go into the second chapter for the creation of the Sabbath. And when we could look at this, but and I go into it in a little bit more in detail, but there's an important thing for us to understand here about the seventh day. On the seventh day, God did stop his creation work. I mean, what did he stop? He stopped the physical creation work, didn't he? But he did not stop the creation of man's character. That it was an ongoing point that he's working at today with each and every one of us. And we've gone over this. Tigor went over this when he went through John 15. And so we see that this is what is taking place. So he may have stopped the physical after, but the spiritual work has never stopped. It's continued on from the Garden of Eden up until the present day, and it'll continue on. It's important for us to recognize this. So that's an important little piece of thinking that we need to recognize about the seventh day. And for us, isn't the seventh day the same thing? Isn't our Sabbath day? Sure, we stop our physical. 6 days we're out there beating our brains out to make a living, right? But the seventh day, we stop. When I had my business on Friday, I would close the door, lock it, and I would head home. And I was all the phone calls and all the pressure to get the jobs out, etc. It's gone. I had this period. One day I'm free, but I wasn't. In a sense, I could now then look at the most important part of my life, and so that's how we need to look at this. Now, there's some important things for us to learn about the Garden of Eden and what took place in the Garden of Eden. And when we read in the book of Genesis, we read that we find in the second chapter that God creates man. It's an important point here. He created man before he created the garden. So that meant that Adam was there to see the garden created. He saw all the stones from the wall and the trees all, he saw the greatness of the Creator in operation. Eve did not see that. Okay. And then when we go there and we read something where it says, God talks to Adam and he tells him, look, I got these two trees here. And you can eat whatever you want out of any of the trees, but this one tree, no, don't eat out of this. Because if you eat out of it, you will die. Now, we just read through there, you realize that for Adam to understand what death was about, God would have had to, in detail, explain what death is and the kind of death that he would have to go through if he ate from that tree. See, we read through these, there's a time element here. We don't know what the time element is exactly as we go through here. We know the time element that God explained this to Adam. And so then we pretty much, that brings us to the end of chapter 2 of Genesis. And we now get into chapter 3. And now, and of course, there is one more thing I need to point out here that takes place. God has Adam look at all the animals and name them. And there's a reason. See, the reason is he wanted Adam to realize that he needed someone. He saw the animals are all paired up. And he said, look, I haven't got anybody that's like me. I can't, animals, this is not worth that. And so then God said, okay, when I wanted you, in effect, you see, God wanted Adam to realize that he needed someone. And so then he created Eve, and it was a great creation, really. So then we come to the point where Satan is going to enter the garden. Now, when we read this, we just read it right through, and it looks like, well, it just happened. Lickety split. No, we don't know the time element here because God is in the process of educating them. Now, how do I know that? Well, I just showed you that he had to educate Adam on death, didn't he? And in turn, that same education had to be brought to Eve. She had to get this education, right? So the time element, we think will just happen lickety split. No, it didn't. God, the amount of time is not there. Because the Bible does not run, it's not, runs on this happened and then that happened and that happened and that happened. No, this happened and maybe he jumps way up to something else happening. And then he may go back and talk about the other thing. It's not a time kind of a book that you can start at day one and you end up on the last page and you're at the last day of this creation. No, it doesn't work that way. And so we have to recognize this, and this is how, we're just recognizing this, that the idea is that God would have to prepare Adam and Eve. And he prepared Adam and Eve, and he didn't allow, he did not allow Satan to come into the garden. You might think, well, Satan just decided to come there. No, he didn't just decide. He was allowed. And we see that by, look at Job. Uh, uh, Job, it's clear that God put a fence around Job, kept Satan away from him. I think personally, I feel that God has put his fence around me. He kept Satan from me. I'm thankful. I thank him every day for that. That's important. So when we recognize this, we have to see that it is God who actually allowed Satan to enter the garden. This is important for us to recognize this. This gives us helps us to get a complete story of what is going on here. And so when we read, well, let me see. I need to get back into my Bible because there's some kind of important in that beginning, those first scriptures. Okay, for chapter 3, the beginning of chapter 3. Now, the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field, which the Lord God had made. Now, if you don't look up these words, you think, oh, well, it doesn't take much to be smarter than a cow. True, you're right. But that isn't what it's talking about. When it's talking about here, it's talking about any being that God created. Now, when they use that term beast, they get a false idea of what's going on. See, and what he's really saying is he's more cunning than any of the angels. This guy in that word can be taken either way, cunning good or cunning bad. And in this case, it's bad. And so that's the idea here. And so this is important. And so look at who he goes to talk to, Eve. Now, when we read this, we read, we read a snake. This is a metaphor. You can't believe that Eve is going to listen to a talking snake versus God, who was there talking to her, teaching her and teaching Adam and Eve, teaching both of them. You have to recognize that can't be. So what you have to do is you have to go back to Ezekiel 28 and find out what was when Satan came into the garden. He came in there dressed to the nines, just like it's described in Ezekiel 28. And so now you can understand why Eve was taken in. Whoa, wow, look at this guy. He's whoa, look how brilliant he is. And so he talks to her, and of course, he lies to her. And, we understand this process. And so the problem with Eve is, and this is the problem with us, or we can have this problem. We fail to check to see whether or not what someone is telling us is true. Do we do that? Sometimes we do. We just, did you know? And then people come along, did you know? Well, wait a minute. All you have to do, we think in the New Testament about the Bereans. Paul was talking to them. He gave them a lot of information, and what they did, they sat down, and then they went home and they got their Bibles out. Or I don't know. It says that they checked up to see whether or not Paul was telling them the truth, and they said, "Oh, yeah, this is true." See, this is what we have to do. This is the lesson here. This is the lesson that she didn't do. She just believed them. And so this is really an important lesson that's being taught right here in the early parts of the Bible. God is telling us, look, you better, when someone tells you something, you better go back and check it to see whether or not this is the case. Does it add up? Does it meet the scripture? And so this is important for us to make that understanding part of our character. So, and of course, we know what happens. Now, there is a kind of an interesting thing. Let me see. God comes into the garden, right? And he finds out that Adam and Eve are sewed together some fig leaves and tried to cover themselves. My hearing aid popped out on me. That's not good. That's, 90, things go haywire. Hearing is one of them. So he comes into the garden and he questions them. And one of the questions he has for them, he says, "Who told you you were naked?" See, someone had to tell Adam and Eve. And because there's only he knew right away, he knew who told them that they were naked. It was Satan. It was the only other option you had, because there wasn't anyone else there to tell them that. And so this is, it's quite clear. Now, the next thing is what you have to, I'd like you to go back. We're going to go back and retrace something here. When God allowed Satan to come into the garden, was Satan free to do whatever he wanted to do? Oh, absolutely. He wasn't. God didn't force him to lie to Eve. He didn't. He was free at that point in time. He had three options. This is it. He had three options. He could have done nothing, and said, well, guess I just won't go in the garden, just pass by. Or he could have gone into the garden and said, look, you're being taught, and you better pay close attention to what you're being taught, because this being is all powerful. You want to really listen diligently and follow his instructions. That he did have that option. Now, whether it was within his psyche to take that option, well, that's open for debate. But he made this free choice. And so when we get to the where God actually gives a penalty, he hands out penalties here in this chapter 3, and one of the penalties is death for Satan. And it's rather interesting. If you go back to Ezekiel 28, you will find that Satan is in fact destroyed. He's burnt up into ashes. And so when we read that he's going to smash his head, when I read this initially, and I thought, well, he might be alive, but he isn't going to be functioning if you smash somebody's brain. You've destroyed their ability to function. That's the end of them. They might exist, but that's it. They're nothing until when I finally realized while reading the end verses and about Satan in Ezekiel 28, you find out, if you read it, you find out he turned to ashes. He's burnt up. And it goes back to what I said about whatever God makes, he can destroy. And people think, well, he was a spirit being, can't be destroyed. No, it doesn't matter. God made him, he can destroy it and has every right to. So this is important for us to recognize. Now, there's something that we need to point out that I'd like to point out about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. See? Now, there's two aspects to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. One is the spiritual aspect. Because if you buy into this, you've bought into the system of survival of the fittest. This is what you're doing. This is the picture that you've presented. This is what you're going to do. This is what you're, and if you think about this, this is what Eve was sold on, and she went to Adam and with the same idea. Look, we're the first ones here. Where we can be at the top of the hill, we'll have everything our own way. We'll be the boss, and basically it doesn't work that way. The guy with the power is at the top. And so in that system, so that's the spiritual side of the fruit. But there was a physical side of the fruit. Until Adam and Eve ate that fruit, their system that they had would perfectly replicate every cell in their body. They would have lived, basically, they could have lived forever as human beings because of this fact that we should understand this, because this is what the scientists are all about. If we can only get ourselves to replicate exact, we will live forever. And this is what the fruit, the physical side of the fruit, this is what it did. It changed their DNA so that it doesn't replicate accurately. This is why we grow old. So this is what we're looking at here. And so if we go to chapter 5, we're going to see read something that's pretty interesting in regards to this. And so it starts in verse 1 of chapter 5. In this book of the genealogy of Adam, in the day that God created him, he made him in the likeness of God. So that's the first thing. He created them, male and female, and blessed them and called them mankind in the day they were created. And Adam lived 130 years, and he begot a son in his own likeness. You see, there was a change. So that change was passed on to his offspring, and that's what we're functioning with. And there is another kind of interesting little tidbit of information here that most all of the men that work on chronology fail to recognize. And that is the fact that Adam was already 130 years old before he begot his son. So that means his son was begotten in year 131. not 130. And this is something that is missed, and it's important when we're doing genealogy. So anyway, that concludes the information that I have for you on these chapters. So if you have any questions or comments that at this time, have at it.
Hi, Don. Hello, everyone. Thank you for presenting tonight. Earlier in your talk, you were describing how limited we are by our five senses, and that we are only able to perceive in a very limited way. And as you were saying that, it reminded me of Psalm 78 in verse 41, where it uses the word limited. And it uses it like this. Yes, they turned back and tempted God and limited the Holy One of Israel. So we ourselves are very limited in our abilities. We could get beyond, we can't go beyond, like you said, the five senses. And yet we turn around and we limit. Today, even, the church limits the Holy One of Israel in the same way they did in the wilderness. We limit him in how much spiritual growth we experience. We limit him in how much we trust in him and how much assurance we place in him. And he understands in verse 39 of Psalm 78, for he remembered that they were just flesh, a wind that passes away and comes not again. So in the case of the wilderness wanderings, he considered the fact that they were merely fleshy men. And he looks down from heaven on his church now with Jesus Christ as the head of his church. And he has pity on us in our weaknesses and the way that we limit him. Today, we limit him. And you see that also in the seven churches of Revelation 2 and 3, when they limited him in all their transgressions in the church, inside the body. So I just wanted to concur with your with the facts of what you said, that yes, we are very limited in the physical, but then I want to add that we in turn tend to have this bad habit of limiting our God in our growth today. But he understands
Right.
that we are only men and women, and we are still in the flesh. So that's all I want to say about that.
Yeah, well, that's right on. I mean, and the other thing is we tend to limit God put our limitations on God, which is really astonishing that we do these things. But and it's something for us to want to be careful of. That are, and I think this is a major. What you put your finger on a major problem for every believer, because this is this basically is what we do. So I appreciate the comment.
John, I'm assuming there's Holman.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Yeah, let's go back near the beginning when Don Roth was talking about time and Genesis 1:14. He didn't mention it here, but he has in the past several times when he talked about the calendar and everything. The subject is about, people say, oh, there used to be 30-day months, and later it was changed, and they come up with ideas of men about when it was done. But God, if God changed things, this came to me while I was thinking about bringing the subject up. If God changed something so basic like that, he would have written it in his Bible the same way as if he changed it from Saturday to Sunday, he would have put it in his Bible. But anyway, a couple of proofs that he didn't change it are in 2 chapters in Jeremiah. I'll just read them, Jeremiah 31 and 33, and it's not the exact words, but the same idea. I'll just read those. It's Jeremiah 31, 35, and 36 out of King James. Thus says the Lord, which giveth the sun for a light by day, and the ordinances of the moon and the stars by night, which divides the sea, waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. Verse 36, if those ordinances depart from before me, says the Lord, then the seed of Israel shall also cease from being a nation forever. And then pretty much the same thought, Jeremiah 33:20. Thus says the Lord, if you can break my covenant of the day and my covenant of the night, that there should not be day and night in their season, then may also my covenant be broken with David, thy servant, that he should not have a son to reign upon his throne. So if God would have changed something so basically, he would have letting us know when. Okay.
Willard.
Just a tag onto the last comment. I am paraphrasing, and I have not looked up the exact location of the scripture, but he is the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Oh, yeah, all right.
God does not change.
Right.
And he will reveal whatever he does to his prophets. And that has not been revealed. So I like that. Thank you.
Any other comments? I think people are thinking. You're looking through your notes and things, and you gotta remember what was said. Willard?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons is that there are no more comments is he was so good, Don. You were so complete in your thoughts and in your message. It was there. It was all there. Thank you. I mean, it was a firm capsule, of information. Thank you.
Okay, Gayleen finished her thought. I cut her off halfway through her thought. If Adam and Eve walked with God and Moses stayed with God 40 plus days and his face shined so bright, his face shined bright, then Adam and Eve must have really shined to the point where they can't see their nakedness. And they had their eyes till they had their eyes spiritually open.
Moses looked on God in his real form. Adam and Eve dealt with God in a human form. Actually, I believe if you look at the book of Genesis, you will see that God walked and talked with individuals, and he walked and talked with individuals as human beings. This is a similar point is made in John when the disciples, after Christ's death, the disciples are, they're in the hideout in a room, and Christ walks through the door. Well, he wasn't in his brilliance as he was just there as in a human form. And this is the same thing that we're looking at in the book of Genesis in these people. For example, Enoch and Noah walked with God. Well, what does that mean? They spent a lot of time with God in a human form, just like Adam and Eve spent with God in a human form. They couldn't have walked with God in his, they wouldn't have lived. When you think about Moses, and God put him in, he protected him, and he says, well, I'll just let you have a little glimpse of my backside, that's all you, because otherwise they'd be putting you in the grave. You wouldn't live. And so this is the understanding that we have as far as Adam and Eve are concerned, and when they were dealing with God after Satan entered into the garden and they had their problems. He actually, if you think about it, it talks about him making clothes for them out of skins, animal skins, which means, you see, this is what we read through there and we don't. Well, wait a minute. What would it mean for him to be able to make clothes out of animal skins? Well, it means they would have had to kill the animals, right? Right. They had to skin the animals. Then they would have had to treat the leather. They would have had to treat the leather. You can't just take animal skins off and sew them together. That does not work. You've got to turn them into leather. And all of this process is teaching. God would have been teaching them how to do it. It doesn't say that, but it's obvious by what it does say, that in order for them for him to do these things, they would have had to have been taught. That was the whole point that he makes there in Genesis, in the latter part of Genesis, about once they're cast out of the garden. So when we're looking at the Bible and we're reading these things, it pays to spend a little bit of time. I know as far as trying to tan a deer hide, because when I was younger, I killed a deer, shot a deer, we skinned it, and it was a good eating animal, actually. And I wanted to turn the hide into leather. And I only had part of the information I needed. There was a neighbor woman who was an Indian, and she gave me some understanding of how to do this, but didn't give me the whole story. And so my deer hide turned out to be pretty stiff. It never worked. So this is what, when we're reading, we need to think about what is being told to us, and there's underlying information that we would be gathering from this. Now, 50 years ago, no one would have been able to understand about the DNA because we didn't know about it. So they would have to suffer with the information that they would have. But at this point in time, I mean, you look at Daniel, the book of Daniel, Daniel 12. The knowledge, it doesn't say increase, it says increase, but if you look up those words, it means multiplied. This is basically what we have seen, is a multiplication of knowledge and understanding. Now, it goes two ways. We have more understanding as far as what the Bible has, as well as people out there have more understanding on how the physical world works.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, about Moses, God was showing Moses his glory, where previously they weren't seeing him in his glory. They were just seeing him as a common person.
Right. That's basically what you're, because if he wasn't his glory, they'd be dead.
Right.
Yeah.
Tugor?
Yeah, I want to go back to the first comment you made. On the fourth day, God separated darkness from light, and the light portion he called it day, and the night, the dark portion.
Right.
Then he gave sun to rule the day, and then moon and stars night. So the rotation of Earth has started on the fourth day. That means you said, like you mentioned, some clock was set in motion on fourth day. Is that correct?
Yes. It had to be in order for prophecy, in order for the calendar to be correct, it had to be that way. If you, we could go to the calendar generator for the creation year, but you would see that you need to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then it's a Sabbath. That's the first Sabbath. You need that count. You can't all of a sudden start the count at the wrong time. So the count has to be started at day 1. And this is basically what God is saying. He's saying, look, on the fourth day, I adjusted the universe to reflect the fourth day so that the count will come out accurately. Now, if you look at that, you'll see that the on the 15th is the first day of unleavened bread, or on the 14th is the Passover. Now, I can't attest to that part of the calendar, but I can attest to the calendar as we are looking at it today, in today's way of looking at it. And it has to account for every single day. In order for us to know when we get to what we're in the Sabbath now. In order for us to know that we're in the Sabbath, we would have to have an accurate count from the first day. It's academic almost, you might say. So that's why when I read that, I said, oh, what God is saying is he's setting the universe to reflect this fourth day.
So my question is, how was he counting the first 3 days?
By the revolution, 3 revolutions of the earth. And you see, everything moves together. The whole universe moves together. When God in Joshua, when he stopped it, it tells you he had the moon stood still and the earth stood, or the sun stood still. He stopped the universe from turning. And in the same situation for Hezekiah, he actually reversed, he set it back. He reset the clock back by 15 degrees. Now, it didn't change the day count one bit. Whatever day it was in Joshua's day, if it happened on a Thursday, it was still a Thursday. Because the earth did not rotate. We're counting rotations, you see. When we look at day 1, that's 1 rotation. Day 2 is 2 second rotation, etc. What if we go and look at where we're at today? It's thousands of rotations, but in fact, factually, we have the number. We have the number. The number is embedded in the calendar generator. If you would look up 2023, and you could tell the exact number of of Sabbaths from creation to the present. It has to be that way. If it's, you see, you can't drop a day out or you can't add a day. You change the whole count. It's so tied, it can't be changed. Mathematically, it's tied.
Did you get the answer, Tagore?
No, my question was how the first 3 days, day 1, day 2, and day 3, how God is counting those days without a clock.
It's through rotation, one rotation. Each day is a rotation. This is why we should be thinking in terms of rotation rather than hours for a clock. And if he doesn't account for it, the clock is off. Our seventh-day Sabbath is off, isn't it?
So,
Here is I wrote an article, and one of the articles that I wrote proving the first of all, proving the calendar generator. You can go on the website you can go on the website biblicalcalendarproof.com, and you can see there's an article, or you can see the video in which I show how the calendar generator functions, why it functions the way it does, and the fact that it is accurate. As you see, well, maybe I just don't understand what your problem is.
yeah, there's an apparent contradiction when you say the calendar was given to us on 4th day, and it starts not with 0, but it starts with 3. If
Right.
it started on 4th day, you have to account for first 3 days. So the Earth's rotation, was it happening before the day and night were separated?
That happened on day 1. He started the rotation on day 1. And it says that clearly because it says the night and the day, it was day 1, it was 1, right?
So the calendar should have started on day 1. Why day 4?
Well, I don't know. You'll have to ask God that, but all I know is what he put in his word, and this is what he did. You'd say, well, the calendar should start on, and it did start on day 1. The reason is you got to look at that word set. You see, he set the calendar. He set it so that it would reflect this 4th day. So when you do that, you've taken into consideration day 1, day 2, and day 3. It's in the calendar.
Okay, I have another side question before we move on. So when these days were created, so probably also God created months and years. So
Correct.
the year was 365 days plus a quarter or a fraction of it. Was it like that from the day 1?
Yes. When you look at this, it is, if he changes that, he changes time. So it has to be consistent. It can never change. If in other words, if all of a sudden he put in an extra day, extra revolution, that doesn't work. And in order for the calendar generator to be accurate, it has to take into consideration this little piece of time, and it does. The calendar generator takes into consideration this little piece of. Not only does it take into consideration the little piece of time, but when you see what happens when we have a leap year, right? We're basing that leap year on a quarter, but we don't have a quarter. We're short a quarter. That's what the travel time is. And so this is one of the important things that I go through in demonstrating how this calendar works, because what happens is you have this little piece of time that you've been putting in. In other words, in order for us to align the Gregorian calendar, which I do, to the solar calendar and to the Hebrew calendar. You see, the solar calendar is the base for everything. Everything has to agree with the solar calendar. And the solar calendar is something that we've measured, and we know what it is. It's 365 and 0.244 or 0.242 or 0.244, I believe. I'm trying to remember it exactly. So in other words, but what do we deal in? We deal in whole days. We can't say, well, the Sabbath started, or the time element is, we got this little piece of time. You don't do that. God gives us the setting of the sun and full days. So what we're tracking time in full days, full revolutions is what we have to be tracking time in. And so if we do that, in order to keep it in line with the years, we have to account for this little piece of time. And I do, if you would go back into the work that I did, I account for every little piece of time that we're aware of, and which the Gregorian calendar does not really do. It's good, but it's not perfect. But it will eventually go out. In other words, from its inception, when Pope Gregory put it into operation, you would have to go out 70,000 years before you would be out of 1 day in time. But if you're following the solar calendar, you won't, at least the solar calendar as I have placed it in place and put it in place. And you can see there is a difference that occurs. In fact, there is a difference that is occurring to the present time, where if you look carefully and you would look at the calendar from inception to the present time, you will see that the holy days are slowly being moved to the back. They're being moved to the fall more. And if you look at the difference in the solar calendar, you would find that it's about 30 days right now, where we have this, I don't know what, difference in the solar calendar and in the Hebrew calendar. It's kind of an interesting thing. It takes a bit to understand this, but here is something in Genesis 12, right? Genesis 12, we have a statement that says it's just out there. 430 years to the day, period. Boom. Plunked it down, right? Now that 430 years is it's talking about an exact day, 430 years prior to when the Israelites were leaving Egypt. And that 430 years is the day that Abraham left for the promised land, was 430 years to the day. You can take a look at the calendar and see this. Now, this is pretty precise, isn't it? Think about what God just did there when he said that. He actually would have had to cause everything to work out so that it would fall 430 days to the day. Right? That's why time is so important to understanding and for our realization that the Bible is factual from cover to cover. I don't know. Did that help?
Yeah, that helps. So the reason I was asking the question was there is another theory called catastrophism. Catastrophism, the planetary collisions that happen that cause the orbits to be disturbed. So the original creation, you have all the whole numbers, 360 days, 12 hours a day, all these things are whole numbers. So the original creation did not have fractions. Because of the collisions of the planetary catastrophic events, now we ended up with 365 plus fraction. If you take all the ancient calendars, they all have 360 days in a year.
And every one of them is wrong. The Egyptian calendar is wrong. The Roman calendar is wrong. They had to correct it. They had to realize, oh, we're off. We're off. We haven't kept our calendar right. So then they correct it, and then it would come off again. Because why? Because they're using the 360-day year, or they're failing to take into consideration the quarter amount of time. It's clear that if God changes this, he would have had to say it in his word that he's changing it. And therefore, we have to understand that it's consistent. Now, when you start, if you just looking at the Exodus, I'll go back even one step further. Go back to the flood year. How many days were in the flood year? See, if you read the account of the flood, it was 385 days. What does that tell you? And so all of these dates and times that are being talked about, and that we just read right over them, and we don't make them a reality, and in fact they are a reality. In Exodus, in the book of Exodus, in the book of Numbers, pardon me, the very first chapter of the book of Numbers makes a statement about the calendar, and I know that no one recognizes what that statement means. The first verses in the book of Numbers is telling us is making an important point about how God's calendar works. And people just read right over it. That doesn't mean a thing. And what it says what it's telling us is that the second year is a duplicate of the first year in its account of time. And you read that and you say, well, how did you come up to that conclusion? Well, all you have to do is count back on those 7 days and you'll find it to be true. Just think about when God showed absolutely what day the Sabbath was, right? In Exodus 15, 16, thinking one of them. Anyway, he tells you the days. He gives you the number. It's the second month. It's the 15th day of the second month. And 7 days later is the Sabbath, the account. And so you got 15 and 7 is 22. So that's the 22nd. That's the Sabbath is on the 22nd. And so then you can just count back in sevens and you have the calendar. It's so neat the way God has put it in there. And then when you take into consideration Numbers 1 and you put that in, now it tells you something even more important about how God runs his calendar. And if we get that, this is not something that you can just, it's pretty involved in one sense, but it's kind of straightforward, but then the explanation takes a lot.
Okay, let's go to other people.
Any other comments or questions? Alan?
Don, you mentioned that in Ezekiel 28, how spirits can be destroyed. And I had to fully agree with you on this. For many years, I could not buy into the idea that Satan cannot be destroyed. Of course he can be destroyed. It actually says there in Ezekiel, I will destroy you, O covering cherub. And yet for some reason, in years past, people didn't want to accept that. I don't know why. What would be the attraction to believing that? What would be the drawing card for that? I don't know. But I'm glad you made mention of that, because there's still lingering effects of the other belief that he cannot be destroyed.
Well, I was aware of that, and I thought, well, maybe you can say that he can't function. I mean, he's just there as like a statue or something, but then later on, when I really started digging into this thing, I realized that Ezekiel, actually, if you go a little bit further, it says he's going to be ashes, and that tells us how he's going to end up. He's going to be burnt up. Yeah, and it is so. This is, and people say, see, this is why when you start thinking about God he has made us, so he has every right to destroy us. So any instructions that he gives or anything that he decides, look, he decided to make Abraham and his offspring into this, in a sense, favored nation. That's he made that decision. I mean, and he had every right to make it. So, because after all, he made us, and he has total control over what's going on. It's important for us to realize this in a way that we just stand there like kind of bare naked, and we have no, I mean, we have no qualifying anything to qualify us other than the fact that he chose us. That's all. He made that decision. So thankfully, I thank God every day that he chose me, because I know what it was not to know. There's nothing worse than not knowing why you're here. This is, and he answered that question for me.
I got a couple comments about Satan and his, plain and simple, it's deception, that he couldn't be destroyed. He didn't want to believe that, and he didn't want you to believe it. So he does what he can to deceive people. I do music. I mean, we do music for feasts and for, the slideshows and things. And I am so amazed at how one version of the song will say that Satan's going to be destroyed and things are going to happen to Satan or he'll be bound. And then the other versions of the song, which are popular versions, don't mention any of that. Don't mention him being bound up. Don't mention him being destroyed. Martin Luther's the mightiest fortress is our God. There's 2 whole verses missing. Where Worldwide didn't have it in, the only ones that got all the verses are some of the Catholic Church, some of the Lutheran churches have got the verses where it says, I will destroy you. You will be destroyed. Satan doesn't want you to know that. So he's deceiving. He's doing what he does best. He's lying and deceiving.
Yeah.